Well, thank you very, very much. First of all, Brendan and Toby, Bobby, thank you for inviting me to speak here and be the first. And hopefully will be a great series of speakers here at the museum. As many of you know, I was a teacher in the city for 36 years. And I can tell you a million stories about my experiences teaching in middle school. But one that stands out was my very first year. Go raise your hand. Mr. Pearlman, chewing gum. This was around the holidays. You're Jewish, right? I said, yes, I am. But you Jews, you don't celebrate Christmas, you celebrate that other holiday. Heineken? I thought to myself, do I really want to teach? But if you think that's bad, where do you hear this? There were certain rules for teachers back around the turn of the century. And some of those I have here. And for example, this entry in 1915 listed rules of conduct for teachers. Okay? And these are real rules of conduct. You will not marry during your term of your contract. Number 2, you're not to keep company with men, assuming that you're presuming correctly that they're all teachers, of course. You must be home between the hours of 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. unless attending school functions. Number 4, you may not loiter downtown in ice cream stores. And in parentheses I wrote, now that's cruel. You may not travel beyond the city limits unless you have the permission of the chairman of the board. You may not ride in a carriage or automobile with any man unless he is your father or brother. Sounds like Iran. You may not smoke cigarettes. You may not dress in bright colors. You may under no circumstances dye your hair. You must wear at least 2 petticoats. Your dresses may not be any shorter than 2 inches above the ankle. And this one, to keep the schoolroom neat and clean, you must sweep the floor at least once daily, scrub the floor at least once a week with hot soapy water, clean the blackboards at least once a day, and start the fire at 7 a.m. so the room will be warm by 8 a.m. And those are the rules.
There were teachers.
Yeah, they were teachers. Yeah.
Probably before unions.
Before unions, yeah.
Yes. Before the votes, right?
Sure. We are sitting in the RSCHP Museum, and I would just like to say a little bit about this wonderful, wonderful building, if I may. The Revere Society for Cultural and Historical Preservation is an organization dedicated to the collection, sorting, and presenting of our local city's past. Our museum is located at 108 Beach Street, and it occupies a corner that once held by the Immaculate Conception Church, which was erected over a century ago. We strive to educate our citizens, especially students, by giving lectures and conducting tours within our museum. Several floors contain pictures and prime resources concerning our history, from memories, photos of Revere Beach in its glory, to a room dedicated to the American author Horatio Alger, whom I'll be speaking about a little bit later. He was born in Revere. We members encourage everyone to enjoy the museum and add to its collection. Lectures have included subjects as varied as the Battle of Chelsea Creek, Slade's Mill, as well as the life of Horatio Alger. From Peter Macaulay, in his collection, we hold precious photographs and relics from Revere Beach's heyday dating back to the 19th century. Our museum is walking distance to the Rumney Marsh Burial Ground, one of the oldest cemeteries in Suffolk County. In conclusion, our museum is a treasure chest of what makes Revere a great city in terms of history and a starting point for those who want to explore our unique urban gems more closely. It is a wonderful, wonderful museum. Dr. Pearlstein takes excellent care of our museum, and we are proud of her and the time she spends dedicating to this place. Okay, Bob.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I was sitting there enthralled, listening to you. I'll be honest with you. I know I'm supposed to be helping to facilitate, but I enjoy listening to Jeff so much. As a former president of this organization, I know Jeff had made mention about Toby. and what the work that she's done here. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all the volunteers that assist Toby every week. They do a great job. But it's also the support of all of our members and those visiting with us today. If you're not a member, I'd like to encourage you to think about membership here, because that's how we're going to keep this going and we're able to build upon this. But little did I ever think that one day Jeff Pearlman and I, who used to spend a lot of our time on Coolidge and Constitution, would ever be standing here at the Revere History Museum.
They were known as the projects, but my mother always said, it's a housing development. Don't ever call it the projects. I didn't know what she meant. All I knew that Nikki was coming at night and I wanted ice cream. And how many remember Nikki at the ice cream man?
Oh,
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So in addition to Nikki and the place in history that he held for us, Jeff, I'd like to prompt and ask you to speak a little bit about 3 key people in our rich history here at Revere. Keeney, Payson, and Alger. If you could.
My pleasure.
You could? Sure. You could speak.
Yeah.
What I did to create this lecture was to break it into different sections, talking about some of the people and especially some of the events that occurred in our history going back to the 17th century. And what I'm going to do is talk about each of the topics and then ask if there are any questions instead of waiting until the very end to ask it, because you might forget what you were going to ask. Okay, probably will. And I don't I've been there, I know. The 3 men that I have chose are 3 men that all have integrity and goodwill. But they also had human frailties. And they're human beings with faults, just like ours. So sit back and listen to each one and learn a little bit something about Revere's history. I have mentioned before that when the Civet, or Rumney Marsh, was settled, there were originally 21 allotments of land. By 1639, these 21 allotments were consolidated into 7 great farms. 7 large farms occupied what is today Revere in the 17th century. The largest allotment belonged to one Robert Keeney, K-E-A-Y-N-E, and contained 314 acres. It's sometimes referred to as the allotment number 10. The Keeney land was later to be the Keeney Farm, extending from where Squire Road is today into North Revere. By the way, Squire Road is named after Captain Keeney because he left England because he wanted to become a squire here in the colonies. He was kind of a little fish in a big pond back in England, because he wanted to be a big fish in a small pond here. Keeney Street is also, of course, named after Robert Keeney. The house that Keeney lived in has disappeared, but records now show that he had at least 15 rooms, some of which were very large. They were richly furnished in the English style. Keeney lived like an English squire, owning slaves, horses, a coach, and hunting dogs. Keeney had a knack for locating goods that many wanted but few could find. He would collect the objects and sell them at an exorbitant price. Keeney was chastised by his neighbors, and especially the church, and he went on with his underhanded business methods anyway. Keeney entertained lavishly and later married off his son Benjamin to the governor's daughter, Governor Thomas Dudley. Dudley Square, which is now Nubian Square, was named after the former governor. Benjamin Keeney, his son, was a weak man and soon divorced his wife and returned home. They had one daughter, Anna, and she was to take care of her grandfather years later when Benjamin died. Keeney began the ancient and honorable its first captain. He also, at the time, seemed to spend more time at his Rumney Marsh estate and indeed built a fine library right here. Although Captain Keeney was not old, he decided that writing of a will would be in order. It was a sound document and shows the vision and wise judgment of a man with much experience. Feeling perhaps guilty for his early years, Keeney bequested money for a library, a town hall, and a covered marketplace to be built for the public. However, he made sure the money would not be given outright for these projects matched funds from the city of Boston. To his wife, he gave a handsome annuity with life interest in both houses, and to his granddaughter, Anna, he bequeathed the resident of his estate to be held in trust for her until she reached a sufficient age. He also saw to it that a Puritan matron would take care of Anna and teach her under careful guidance. Keeney died at age 61 and was given a full military funeral. Captain Robert Keeney, who when younger was thought to be unscrupulous and mean, in old age seemed very worldly and generous. Two more things about Robert Keeney. Number one, he is buried at the King's Chapel Burial Ground in Boston. If you walk into the King's Chapel Burial Ground, I've done this many times, especially on field trips, and you take a left, you'll see a gigantic stone, looks like a fireplace. And in it you will read about Captain Keeney, and at the bottom it mentions that he had a hunting lodge in Rumney Marsh. By the way, when I did research years ago on Captain Keeney, I was interested in Anna, I was interested in what happened to her. It's a tragic story. She, her grandmother, who was her guardian, forced her to marry a fellow by the name of Robert Long, who was many years older. And she wasn't happy in the marriage, but could do nothing about it. And then she met a fellow by the name of Nicholas Page, a rum runner, by the way, and a man who took risks, more her age. And they got married. And Lane never contested the marriage. In fact, as far as he was concerned, he was still married and would not give one penny to Anna. And for years, Anna lived right here in Rumney Marsh, and it was only in her later years that the court finally decided that the money should go to her. It's an unbelievable story about the whole Keeney family, beginning with Robert. Second thing is the Ancient Honorable Artillery Company is the oldest military company in America, founded in the 1600s, obviously. And their headquarters is in Faneuil Hall, up on the second floor. And I've gone up to that area, and on the wall are the pictures of every gentleman who has been captain of the Ancient Artillery Company, and the first picture is of Captain Robert Keeney. '18th century. The Reverend Phillips Payson. Most Americans, I'm going to sit down. Most Americans seem knowledgeable about discussing the Constitution. The names of Washington, Franklin, and Madison are well to the majority of our citizens. Few of us know that not all of our founding fathers were famous and found on the pages of history texts. During the struggle to ratify the Constitution in Massachusetts, we people of Revere were represented by one such man. He's a lesser-known figure by the name of Phillips Payson, P-A-Y-S-O-N. During the debates of January and February 1788, Reverend Payson represented the town of Chelsea. We were known as Chelsea back then, from 1739 to 1846. Okay? By the way, when the Constitution was ratified in Philadelphia on September 17, 1787, it didn't become official until at least 9 out of the 13 states ratified it. And so in each state capital, they had debates over whether or not the Constitution should be ratified or it shouldn't be ratified. And there was a lot of people at that debate here in Massachusetts that were against the Constitution, feeling that it gave too much power to the federal government. So that's where we are right now, in this ratifying convention where Reverend Payson represents Chelsea. Born on January 18, 1736, young Phillips was the son of Phillips and Ann Payson. He was raised in Walpole and attended Harvard College. A scholar of Latin, natural philosophy, and astronomy, he was ordained in Chelsea on October 26, 1757. His father and 3 of his brothers were also clergymen in Massachusetts. Payson succeeded Reverend Thomas Cheever as the Congregationalist minister to the citizens of Chelsea and remained in his pulpit for the next 43 years. The church, by the way, is the counseling center, the former Masonic temple on Beach Street. That's the church we're talking about. The man who Payson succeeded, Thomas Cheever, was the first minister, and he was also the first school teacher. He tutored young men for the ministry at his home on Fennell Street. It was Thomas Cheever's son, Joshua, who owned the land that in the mid-18th century was given to our town as a cemetery. That's the Rumney Marsh burial ground. Although a clergyman, Payson came to the conclusion that the colonies were correct in wanting their independence from Great Britain. During the Battle of Lexington on April 19, 1775, Payson marched with 25 others to Arlington, known then as Menominee. The rear of Lord Percy's army was just passing with supplies and reinforcements for the British troops at Lexington. Payson and a small group attacked the Redcoats and captured most of the supplies, thus crippling the advance of the King's troops. In the skirmish, several British troops were injured, and none of Payson's band were hurt. For the duration of the war, Payson took no further military action, but the Fighting Parson, as he was known, continued to support American independence from the pulpit. In the years following, the Constitution was drawn up and completed in Philadelphia in 1787. During the debates, which, as I mentioned, were often heated, one issue that split the convention, and really split the convention, was the question of whether a religious test be required for a person to run for public office. Reverend Payson argued eloquently against such a test. I quote, these are his words, "Mr. President," and he was talking to John Hancock, who, by the way, was the president of the ratifying convention. "Mr. President, after what has been observed relating to a religious test by gentlemen of acknowledged abilities, I did not expect that it would again be mentioned as an objection to the proposed Constitution that such a test was not required for office. Such were the abilities and the integrity of the gentlemen who constructed the Constitution as not to admit of the presumption that they would have betrayed so much vanity as to attempt to erect bulwarks and barriers to the throne of God. Relying on the candor of this convention, I shall take the liberty to express my sentiments on the nature of a religious test, and shall endeavor to do it in such propositions as will meet the approbation of every mind. The great object of religion is God supreme, and the seat of religion in man being the heart and conscience, that is, the reason God has given us, employed on our moral sanctions in the most important consequences as related to the tribunal of God. Hence, I infer that God alone is the God of conscience, and consequently it attempts to erect human tribunals for the consciences of man are impious encroachments upon the prerogatives of God. Upon these principles, had there been a religious test as a qualification for office, it would be, in my opinion, have been a great blemish upon the instrument." End quote. On January 31st, debate ended, and a motion made to pass the Constitution. Feeling that the vote would be close, Hancock offered 9 amendments to be considered. During the first week of February, 1788, February 6th, actually, the amendments were debated and adopted. Hancock's amendments were not only approved by the convention, but 2 of them later became the 9th and 10th Amendments to the Bill of Rights. On February 6, 1788, by a vote of, 187 to 168, the delegates agreed to ratify the Constitution of the United States. It has been stated that the American Constitution was a work of genius. We citizens of Revere can be proud that we had as fine a man as Reverend Payson to speak for us 200 years ago. Payson Street, of course, named after Reverend Phillips Payson. I can't talk enough about this man. And by the way, he is buried. And when I do field trips at our local cemetery, the Rumney Marsh Burial Ground, we go right to his grave and we talk about him. Okay? as well as his family, very good as well. '19th century. One of the most respected and well-known names in the North Chelsea-Revere community was that of Horatio Alger Jr. Alger, as we approach the 200th anniversary of his birth, it's important that we learn about one of America's most prolific writers. Born in Revere, Chelsea in those days, on January 13, 1832, he lived for a short time at 88 Beach Street. I have to go back a minute because we're not really sure if indeed he was born and lived right down the street here at 88 Beach Street or a little further down near the Legion. To this day, we're really not sure which house he was born and lived in, so I want to make that clear. The Reddish Building, right down here, not far from the Immaculate Church, is where Alger lived for a short time after his birth. His father, the Reverend Horatio Alger Sr., graduated Harvard Divinity School in 1829 and was ordained shortly thereafter. The elder Alger was our minister for several years at the church on Beach Street, so he too served as a minister. Horatio Alger Sr. served as a minister right here on Beach Street. He also taught grammar from 1839 to 1840. Horatio Alger Jr. was a child prodigy who showed an early interest in writing. He wrote a short story at age 13. However, his stern father insisted that the boy follow him into the Unitarian ministry. At 16, Alger began matriculating at Harvard and later Harvard Divinity School. While studying for the ministry at the age of 20, he met his only true love, a young lady named Patience Stiers. But his father crushed this budding relationship. Hurt by his father's overbearance, Alger traveled to Europe and began to write poems and short stories. When he returned to America, he became a minister to in the small Massachusetts town of Brewster. After some time, as the religious leader of the community, Alger was accused by several boys of sexual misconduct. Crimes were never proven, and Alger was not allowed to present his case in court. The town fathers ordered that Horatio leave immediately and that his services were no longer needed. I told you at the outset, Keeney, Alger, they had human frailties. They were not perfect. Who is? This proved to be a turning point in young Alger's life, for at this time he returned to the family home, which was now South Natick. The young man was disillusioned by the ministry, and after much soul-searching, he decided to leave his home and become a writer. He went to New York City and lived by himself in meager surroundings. Much of his own life he would use as material for his future work as he wandered the streets, half-starved and companionless. It was in New York City that Alger observed homeless boys on the streets, either selling newspapers or shining shoes. These young bootblacks and others like them were poor kids who lived in an orphanage/boarding house. The Newsboys Lodging House was run by an amiable man by the name of Charles O'Connor. It was at this establishment that Alger would find the models for his future books, tracing one from, quote, rags to riches. The writing at this time was strictly in the realm of juvenile fiction. Bestsellers such as Ragged Dick, Frank's Campaign, and Luck and Pluck had as its themes poor, unfortunate boys who, through good manners, luck, and honesty, became successful and rich in later life. Dividing his time between writing and crusading lectures on the evils of the exploitation of youth, he became a national figure in literary circles and was invited back to Harvard every year to speak at reunions. By the late 1870s, his books were banned by some libraries and churches as being a bad influence upon the youth of America. Perhaps it was the language that Alger used, or perhaps the fact that his heroes swore or even smoked that turned the establishment against him. His publisher went bankrupt, and Alger began to write biographies on famous Americans such as Lincoln or President Garfield, who both rose from poverty to become presidents of the United States. Alger was always in ill health. He only stood about 5'2", by the way. He was a little guy. But he was always in ill health, either suffering from asthma, bad eyesight, along with his professional talents coming to an end, made him quite ill. Too sick to remain in New York, he returned to South Natick and lived with his sister at the family home. On July 18, 1899, he passed away and his body was cremated. Today, there is a tomb in the Glenwood Cemetery in Natick of Alger's ashes. Although Alger's personal experience with success did not bring him happiness, his stories of little shoeshine and newspaper boys becoming wealthy through their deserving good natures have entertained millions and encouraged many Revere readers to hope for similar rewards for hard work. And listen to this. On his sickbed, he wrote his own epitaph. And this is what he wrote. Beneath this stone lies the body of Horatio Alger Jr. Well, what of it? By the way, if you Google, there is today an Horatio Alger Society. And every year they give an award to a man or woman who, like Alger's heroes, began in poverty and distinguished themselves in either the arts, the sciences, or entertainment. One of the recipients years ago was Carol Burnett.
Oh.
Who I guess, I don't know that much about her, but I guess she was raised by her grandmother.
Yeah.
And when she went like,
Yeah.
I guess that was a signal to her grandmother.
Yes.
Yeah. But,
Yes.
and as we all know, she rose to prominence. But there is today a Horatio Alger. And we have a room here in the museum dedicated to Horatio Alger with many of his books. Now, before I get to my next topic, any questions or I'd like to hear some comments. Oh, by the way, I meant to mention this too. I'm an historian, but I'm an educator first and a historian second. And what does that mean? It means that if you don't leave here knowing a little bit more about our local history than you did when you walked in here, I flunked. I failed, okay? I want you to learn as much as possible about history in our own backyard, as I call it. Any questions or comments about either Keeney, Payson, or Horatio Alger Jr.?
Payson. I live on Payson Street. So.
Oh, okay. And the Shirley School where I went to sixth grade there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's always been this, like, I don't know, I guess it's a rumor or something. It's probably true about a cemetery.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say it. Yeah.
Okay, you know what I was.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit
Behind
about
the stowers.
Is it literally like it's a cemetery underneath, like where some houses?
Tombs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. One
So
time.
where exactly is the
Okay.
the living room? Is it a selling point or not?
It is behind, or was behind,
Yeah.
Vaz's
Okay.
Yeah, to go up
That's a
through there.
wonderful place.
You have to go
Yeah.
through.
I've been there many times, yeah.
Where, Vaz's
Yeah.
Oh. Just kidding. Someday.
That's
Many years from now.
What I understand, Jan Vern
Yes.
owned the farm right
Yes.
there.
Who does?
Jan Vern owned a farm, and it went all the way from like.
Robert Janvin, that's
Jan Vern
correct.
all the way down to School Street. It was
Jan
a farm.
Vernette?
Jan Vern
Yes.
Ave.
Named after.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that, he owned a farm that was sloped all the way down to School Street.
That's
Now,
right.
He would have had to, I mean, if there were people buried there too.
Well,
Yeah.
so that was like a cemetery that just then didn't become a cemetery.
Yeah, it was just,
Okay.
not too many people were buried there either, yeah. It became decrepit and weathered.
Yeah.
But Cary Ave isn't that far from there either.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
And
yeah.
I guess Janvin owned that whole area. at
Yes,
the
he
time.
did.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Was Anna Keeney a bigamist?
Was she a bigamist?
Well, you said,
Well, yeah, in a manner of speaking, you could say that. Yeah. Yeah, she was so much in love with Tell you, she was in the vanguard of women's rights before they knew about that. Yeah, Anna Keeney, and she stuck to her guns too. That's the amazing thing. She kept this thing adjudicated for years and years and years, you know. Grandfather's probably rolling over in his grave because he was the one who suggested that the grandmother keep a strict control over her until she turned, you know, I guess 21 those days, yeah. Yeah, I guess you could say she was, but again, And love is blind, and again, she was forced to marry this Robert Lane, who I don't think he was mean, but he was just much older, and she just was never in love with him.
Did she have any children?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. Fascinating.
Early years, the last presence of, like, who was the last Mohican? The presence of indigenous people in Revere. Can you point to a settlement or individuals that might have survived all the various wars?
Well, going back to when Samuel Maverick first came to this area, which later became Romney Marsh, back in 1616, believe it or not, there were Native Americans living here, and a horrible smallpox epidemic took over. And it was actually Samuel and his wife Amias who actually helped heal many of the Native Americans. Many of them died. There were two tribes, one led by a Sagamore George and another led by a Sagamore John, who were part of the Wampanoag tribe. But with development, and certainly by 1739, when Romney Marsh became part of Chelsea, the Native Americans were either pretty much erased from this geographic area or moved somewhere else. But they were here. They have found near St. Anthony's, I believe, and also down on the beach, some arrowheads and some shells that were colored that they supposedly used for wampum back in the 17th century. So I've heard. Okay, I don't have any evidence of that.
Enough shells down there.
What's that? Enough shells down there, for sure.
Yeah. I think they did find some artifacts in the cemetery behind the funeral home. When Mrs. Matthews, because my grandmother owned that land, when Mrs. Matthews was building her house on Payson Street,
Yes.
they found human bones there. In Tombstone.
It might have been an Indian burial ground.
Right.
I did hear that. Yeah, I did hear that as
Right.
well. Yep.
Right there on Payson Street.
On Payson Street. Yeah. And also near St. Anthony's Church, from what I heard too. Of course, before that was built.
But I remember my dad talking about that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
There's so much. I mean,
They had to, stop the foundation.
So if I could, and then we used to
It
slide
might have
down
been
that hill.
the native people living here, and they were buried.
let me tell you.
No
Let me tell you
markings.
about the history of Revere. I have a garage full of materials that I've collected since 1976. Why 1976? In 1976, we were celebrating our bicentennial. And I was always interested in growing up in Revere, who the streets were named after, who the schools were named after.
Yeah.
And so I went to then editor Dickie Powers of the Revere Journal. And I said, Mr. Powers, my name is Jeff Pearlman, I teach at the Lincoln School. I would like to write an article. I don't want to get paid. I would like to write a weekly article beginning with the Native Americans and going up to the development of Revere Beach. Because we have a history in Revere, just like the United States has a history. And he said, okay, go ahead. And that's where I basically get all my material that I'm reading to you right now and that I've been researching, okay? In the early 90s, I was teaching, of course, at the Lincoln. Dr. Rocco Malfitano had a teacher's meeting. And he made an announcement that computers were coming into the schools. And no longer were they going to be an elective, but they have to be mandatory. Does anybody have an idea for a new elective? Dr. Malfitano, I have a 16-week course on local history. And it was a doctorate. And I taught it. I gave field trips to the kids. It was taught at the high school as well. And based on the articles that I wrote, that course is, I guess, still being taught at the high school on the history of Revere. Revere, by the way, as I mentioned, was Romney Marsh until 1734, when it became Chelsea. From 1734 to 1846. In 1846, we became the town of North Chelsea. In 1871, we became the town of Revere. And in 1915, with the election of our first mayor, we became the city of Revere. And I always tell my students, if you're looking to do research on the Civil War and who in Revere fought for the Union, don't look under Revere, look under North Chelsea. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, Jeff.
One more thing, Sue, that I should mention. Nice to see you, Susan. One more thing. Although I've amassed a lot of material and there's a lot of stuff in the back of my head, I don't know everything. So if I don't know an answer to a question, I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna tell you I don't know. Like I tell my students, I don't know the answer, but I think I know where to go to get it. And I'll get back to you. So,
What sort of records is there about slaves in this area?
not much. Not
And
much.
is there any indication of where there was a burial ground
Oh, yeah.
for slaves?
Yeah. Back in 2013, the Lumley Marsh Burial Committee, of which Bob is a member and Brendan, of course, chairs, I had an idea. I proposed, because this was the anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, that we do some research. And number one, find out if there were actual people, I knew this, but who were the actual people that owned slaves in our community? What were their names? How old were they? Perhaps how did they die? And I went to Shurtleff, Benjamin Shurtleff's book, and others, Joseph Chamberlain, who wrote the history of Chelsea, and I found out not only the names of the slaves, who owned them, how old they were, and how they died, but where they were buried. They were buried in unmarked graves on the north side of the Lumley Marsh burial ground. And I proposed that we erect two plaques with the names, the ages, and the owners of those slaves right there on the north wall, and that's where they are today. So indeed, I'm not proud to say this, but many of our famous people, including Samuel Sprague, who was one of the heroes at the Battle of Chelsea Creek, from Chelsea, owned slaves. But again, it was, I hate to say this, but it was a man's property, a woman's property. Often, and I found this out by reading the wills of some of these people. I leave Sally to my wife. I leave John to my wife. Human beings. I know it's incredible to think about that, but
It's inconceivable.
it's inconceivable in 2023. But
It's evidence that it happened.
yeah, it's evidence that it happens. As a matter of fact, and I always do this on my field trip, Bobby knows this, when we look at the huge stone of the veterans who were buried at the Lumley Marsh burial ground from the colonial wars up through the Civil War, one of them is a fellow by the name of Job Worrell, W-O-R-R-O-W. Job Worrell has his name there, along with the rest. But next to his name is the word covered. And he's buried in one of those, along with his wife. And their names are on the plaque as well. Job Worrell. Question?
Do any of the slaves that were buried in the burial ground have like a headstone or anything? None of them.
No.
So there's just markings.
And you'll find that in many cemeteries throughout
Right,
Massachusetts,
right.
unfortunately. Yeah.
But the fact that they were buried, doesn't it mean something? Were they?
I don't know if any prayers were said over their body.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was wondering. Like were they kind of like special slaves or something? Because usually I would just think it would be like a mass.
No, it wasn't no, I don't think it was a mass grave, no.
No. Yeah. So it would be kind of interesting that they're still
Yeah.
in the burial ground in that area.
They are in the burial ground.
And
yeah.
makes you wonder, like, what the relationship was between them and their owners.
In some cases, they were close.
Yeah.
Yeah, in some cases, I hate to compare it to a man's horse or his
Right.
carriage.
Right.
And I did this in public school when I was teaching U.S. history, when I was talking about slavery. And I hate to compare it, but again, you wouldn't purposely beat the hell out of your horse or purposely run over a rut in the road with your expensive carriage. So many of these slaves were well taken care of, okay? Again, even in the South, despite we read Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin and all of that, many of the slaves, I don't want to say they were well taken care of because they were slaves, but they weren't beaten mercilessly either. What would be the use of that?
No.
You're paying $600. In those days, a lot of money for a slave.
Correct me if I'm wrong though, even within our Constitution, Okay, now there was the Articles of Confederation prior to that, and
Yeah.
the Constitution.
Yep.
That kind of avoided, and it's to me a contradiction in terms it's about liberty and freedom, but yet only for certain few. That includes women as well in the Constitution, and how a particular person of color's vote was only worth 3/5 of a vote.
Yes,
Okay, so
Yeah.
I mean it's within our own Constitution.
that's right. They couldn't decide when when it came time to decide how many people in a state, how many representatives there should be for people in the state. The South wanted all slaves to be counted. Why? More people, more representatives. North said, no way, no way. You would think it'd be the opposite, okay? But we know what the South's rationale was about that. No, the more people, the more reps. And so they decided on the 3/5 compromise. You're absolutely right, Rich. And 3/5 compromise meant that the total number of people in the state, slaves, they would take 3/5 of that number and add it to the population. So it was a compromise. South didn't get what they wanted, North didn't get what they wanted. But that's true.
Yeah.
And remember when Abigail Adams wrote in a famous letter to her husband John when they were writing the Constitution, remember the ladies. She wrote, remember the ladies.
She was a shop lady.
Oh, she'd be a CEO of some company, or she'd be like Amy Klobuchar, maybe a senator or something. No, she was.
If I could interrupt at this time, I'd like to try to take this conversation a little bit sideways, talk a little bit about yourself. Obviously, we've been friends for a long time. I've heard many of your presentations, and every time I hear it, I do learn something. You are an educator, but you're so enthusiastic, and it's very encouraging for me to hear the sounds and the reactions of some of the people that are here to some of these stories. There's a lot of Revere's history that people are unaware of. We hope to be able to share much more of it here. But I wanted to just to ask you, the schools of Revere, named after some very important people. If you could, expand upon that just a little bit. Since you have many of your own colleagues here, some of your own students that have gone through those schools, I think it would be really interesting to people of Revere that are watching on Revere Cable TV, as well as in this audience, to learn a little bit about the schools of Revere.
The time is flying by so quickly. We could do this again, I hope.
Yes.
I hope we can do this again. In 1838, a special committee was named by the town to survey the school situation in the center being the center of Chelsea. It reported that a brick building to be used as a combined school and town hall could no longer accommodate all the 100 school-age children in the vicinity. Benjamin Shurtleff, Zachariah Hall, and John Wright were the survey committee members. Shurtleff started the money-raising effort with a cash gift of $300. This was accepted and amounted to enough to acquire the lot and drew plans. On May 7th, 1838, the committee's report was heard, and it was granted authority to acquire the half-acre lot. It was proposed that the two-story building should contain a large room on the first floor for immediate use for the 160 students to be seated in 8 rows of 20 seats each. The desks in each row were to be contiguous and individual units. It would, of course, be an ungraded school and the assignment of one teacher. Could you imagine one teacher teaching 160 kids of different grades? Okay. But let me skip through this. That was the beginning of what would eventually become the Shurtleff School, named after Benjamin Shurtleff because they had a cost overrun. And they were going to stop building the school unless more money was raised, and Shurtleff said, I will give the money myself as long as the school is named after me. Modest. But what's fascinating, and I tell people this all the time, is that when Bobby and I were growing up, there were no less than 17 schools in Revere at one time. Nobody was blessed. I
went to all of them.
Okay.
When the Lincoln School burned down.
Okay. Well,
We went to all of them.
Bobby said he wanted me to talk a little bit about myself. Like Richie, I went, because I lived on Campbell Avenue until I was 6 years old. I went to the Walcott School in the first grade. Okay? Then we moved to the, quote, housing development. I went to the Barrows School for the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade. They didn't have a 5th grade when I went there, so they bused us to the Liberty School. Okay? 6th grade, I went to the Shirtless School. And my class was the last class to go 7th, 8th, and 9th at the Garfield. And of course,
Then I went to the night.
then I went to the 9th. Yeah. Right after I graduated, I think it was 1963, somewhere around there. And then I spent, of course, my last 3 years at Revere High School. But listen to the names of these schools. These are in no order, by the way. Many of them are named after former educators and presidents of the United States. There were 3 schools in Beachmont. Mary T. Ronan, named after an educator, on Bradstreet Ave. This woman right here, Julia Ward Howe.
House school, yeah.
Howe School. By the way, Julia Ward Howe wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Mine eyes have seen the glory. Oh, really? And, let me finish. Her husband, Samuel G. Howe, began Perkins School for the Blind. The 3rd school was the Louis Pasteur School, named after the great scientist. I mentioned the Walcott School, located between Campbell Avenue and North Shore Road. Walcott School is named after a former Massachusetts governor, not Jersey Joe Walcott, the heavyweight champion. Okay. Shirtless School I mentioned. The Center School, located across from the Little League Park, okay, was for kids who want to take up trade, okay, yeah, sheet metal work and things like that. McKinley School, named after an assassinated president, William McKinley, who was assassinated in Buffalo, New York in September of 1901, and the school was built shortly thereafter in his memory. The Carl Willard Mabie School.
Never heard of it.
I know, M-A-B-I-E, located behind Kelly's in Oak Island. It was a school that only went up to the 4th grade, and it was named after a young man who was killed in World War I. The Theodore Roosevelt School, located in the Point of Pines, again, named after one of our great presidents.
Because
Go ahead.
he opened up this campaign off of the steps of the Pines Hotel.
Yes, I was going to get to that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Also, another president also spoke at the Pines Hotel, William Howard Taft,
That I didn't know.
who came after Theodore Roosevelt. Yeah. Oh, that Pines Hotel. In fact, they had yachts down at the Pines. I mean, don't get me started. Where's Brenda? Is she going to bring in dinner tonight? You know, I can talk all day. I mean, really. Okay.
Not really, we're gonna be closing that pretty soon.
Is that a hint? The Henry Waite School, located in North Revere. Now, Henry Waite is an interesting man. Henry Waite was neither a politician, nor an educator, nor a scientist. Henry Waite was a businessman. He was one of the wealthiest tobacco importers. Bond and Waite was the name of his company in Boston. He lived in Revere for a short time, and they named the school after him at 139 Salem Street in North Revere. Liberty School, built after World War I. Max Achenbach School, located on Park Avenue. Summer school. And it was hot. Named after, again, sadly, a Revere veteran who was killed in World War I. The Garfield School, named after James A. Garfield, a beloved president, a man who I mentioned when I talked about Horatio Alger Jr., a man who, as a boy, was so poor, he worked as a canal boy. In those days, in Ohio, they had a canal that would link 2 bodies of water. And in those days, the only way that they could propel a vessel through the water is if there were teams of horses on both banks. And Garfield, as a boy, rode one of those teams of horses. And he rose to be President of the United States. He was assassinated in July of 1881 in Baltimore, and he was so beloved that in Revere that same year, the Revere Journal, which came out that year, had a whole front page dedicated to him, and many buildings were draped in black. And of course, the Garfield School, when it was built, was named after that beloved president. Cassandra M. Barrows, that I went to as a young kid on Mountain Avenue, was named after a former principal. Paul Revere School, Abraham Lincoln School, which, by the way, was first built in 1911. And then it burned down in 63. And I remember, again, personal story if I may, I was in the choral club, right, Sue? And we sang at City Hall. And that night, we were at City Hall with my parents, and that was the night that the school burned down. And as we were coming back from City Hall, where I lived in the park, all we saw was the red sky. Wow. And I thought, we didn't know what that was, and it was the night of Lincoln School.
You know, that school burning down though, well, for me, it put me in all the schools throughout the city.
Yes, yes.
So I think back then, we pretty much went to a school that was in our neighborhood.
Yeah. And you went, what, from 9 to 12 or 12 to 4? They had split the hours.
That's right.
Yeah.
But this allowed me to meet so many people throughout the city. Having gone to so many different schools. A lot of the folks that I know today, I probably wouldn't have known had I not gone to all these different schools. So, I mean, unfortunately, the school burned down, but there was an upside to that. You know, a lot of the folks that I still know today throughout the city is because of that.
I know. I'll have to come back again. Okay. But I want you to hit that because it's fascinating. Okay. Augustine C. Whalen. Whalen School, named after a former principal. I don't have this in my notes, but Susan B. Anthony. Elementary section named after, of course, the woman suffragette. Beachmont School, after the capital of Revere. Some of my friends used to. And of course, Immaculate Conception Church, where many went, and was a rival of Revere High, especially with football. Back in the old days, you know. And that is a little bit of the history of the Revere schools. Any questions, comments about the Revere schools?
It's just so sad that we lost them all.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's a
We
whole.
talk about that, you know, often. A bit like there's the McKinley School still standing, that solid brick building. And just so many others are just gone. Because I went to,
Yeah, a community
Yeah.
because of that.
Yes,
Once they broke
yes.
up, that stuff.
And the teachers were so tight.
Yes,
in those schools.
yes, it was like a family.
I mean, the Garfield School brought everybody together in
Yes.
ninth grade during
In
my
ninth
time.
grade.
Yeah, that's
right.
right.
That was also supported
And see, it was the 10th grade
Yeah.
when I went to the high school
Yes.
and I got to meet
Everybody.
everybody.
We were the first graduating class out of the new high school, so I got the benefit
Yes.
of being in the old high school, which I loved, and in the new high
Yeah,
school.
the new-
Yeah.
So you were a year ahead of me.
75.
Ron and Paul,
Yeah.
yeah, 76.
The
So
question,
we
one
sort of
year.
had the same.
Yeah.
More of a comment though, but would it be interesting to do some research into why the schools
Roosevelt
burned
on
down?
Rhine.
in a fire?
I
Yeah,
heard
everywhere.
the same thing.
Will we ever know?
Well,
Because of it, was it
There's no
because of insurance?
information there, there's no information there on, you try to Google the information on why all these old schools burned to the ground, they were actually closed, most of them were closed.
Yeah, thank goodness, yeah.
When they burned to the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, I missed the show.
That's a different
Shirtless
story.
school.
That's a whole other story.
That's a whole other story, and I'd like to
Something on that.
Right.
Take a walk on the dark side.
Yes,
The dark
I'm
side
afraid
of Revere.
to,
By the way,
Scary.
so I'll get right to you. By the way, I gotta tell you a personal story. Got a call about a month and a half ago from a woman in New York. And she was writing a book about the history of Revere. So I think Toby told her to get in touch with me. And the woman did. And I talked to her for a while and told her about myself. And what she wanted to write about was the murder of Carol Stewart. I said, excuse me, ma'am, as a historian, I try to build this city up.
Yeah.
I will have
Yeah.
no part.
We know
I think
about-
she was extremely offended. I didn't hang up on her,
We know
but I
what
said I
happened.
will have no part at all
Oh,
about that incident.
Yeah.
I mean, I spent my life building up this city. I was heartbroken
Yeah.
at the gunfire on the beach.
Yes.
3 months ago.
Yeah.
I know.
And
But we know what happened with that story.
we do.
We know.
Yes.
We do.
We don't know what
It
happened
doesn't
with
need to be
the,
written.
why a lot of schools
Schools have-
that burned to the ground.
Right, but
That's-
anyhow,
If you go from Chelsea, a lot of their old schools are still
They're
up
shirtless
and they're being
schools.
utilized.
Just recently.
McKinley's an anomaly that's
Yes.
being used
Yes.
as a school.
Yeah.
So, I don't mind going down the dark side if it needs to, but I'm not sure I'm gonna make a lot of friends.
before we run out of time, Bob?
If I could, Jeff, I'd like you to talk a little bit about, if you will, the site of the first naval battle and lead us into Slade's Mill, if you will, at Chelsea Creek.
Sure. You all have a handout.
Yes.
If you don't, I have extras.
Yes, dear.
Grab some water.
Diana
Diana Chelsea.
Diana. The Diana was the name.
Those are all.
We wrapped a few of them in
That's
together.
here, Slade's
We wrapped
Mill.
a few of them in together. Chelsea Creek, naval battle, Slade's Mill.
Nope, I got these three. Lots of
History.
You have a timeline.
I can go on this.
You have a timeline that I made out,
Oh, yeah.
but I'd like to give you some details in as short time as possible because I've given lectures that have lasted an hour just on the Battle of Chelsea Creek. But because of my allotment of time, I'm going to give you a good history of the Battle of Chelsea Creek. And of course, if you have any questions, by all means, or comments, by all means, ask them. Few residents of our city are aware that one of the most significant battles of the American Revolution took place within walking distance of our homes. On June 1st, 1774, in the aftermath of the Boston Tea Party, our citizens were punished by having the port of Boston closed and hundreds of troops sent to patrol the streets of the capital, so-called intolerable acts that were passed in that year. It not only closed the port of Boston and sent British troops to our shores, but it also made our own local government disappear, and one General Thomas Gage was sent here to be our military governor. A provincial congress was formed by the Patriots with a committee of public safety led by John Hancock, Joseph Warren, and others. This clandestine body acted as a government in exile for a time. On May 14th, 1775, a communication was sent by the committee in regard to livestock that the British captured and used as fresh meat. The Patriots thought it a good idea to remove the livestock inland, so the British soldiers would find it difficult to capture these animals. Where were the livestock? The livestock were on Noddle's Island, present-day East Boston, and Hog Island, present-day Orient Heights. They were targeted by the Patriots for the removal. Noddle's Island was owned by Henry Howell Williams. Everybody boo, boo, boo. He was a Tory. He was a loyalist. He sympathized with the British and he made a fortune from his business. On May 23rd, a second order was issued by the committee and action began by the colonists to move to the farm of Mr. John Sale. John Sale owned the farm, which is today Beachmont, and begin the removal of the livestock. Colonel John Stark from New Hampshire and his regiment of approximately 300 soldiers had been camped in Medford at the time and told to march in the early morning of May 27th, 1775. march where? To the Sale Farm. A second officer, Colonel John Nixon, and his troops were in Cambridge and also were ordered to Chelsea. Finally, present were local militia from Chelsea, led by Samuel Gerish and our own neighbor, 60-year-old Captain Samuel Sprague from Chelsea. At around 6 a.m. on the morning of May 27th, 1775, the troops all met at the church on Beach Street. That church always comes up. And had a light breakfast. Plans? Well, it's a long march from here. Guys gotta eat.
Yeah, some light boxes.
Plans were made for the final march to the Sales Farm and for the removal of the livestock from the two islands. By 10 o'clock that morning on the 27th, most of the colonial troops had arrived at the Sale Farm, and Stark's troops began to cross from the farm to Hog Island, where successfully they began to evacuate the animals and bring them inland to Sale's Farm. While this was being accomplished, a small group of 30 crossed over to Noddle's Island and proceeded to do the same. While the sheep and cattle were being removed, several patriots, stupidly and in their enthusiasm, set fire to several haystacks and other property belonging to Mr. Williams. This was a costly error, for the smoke from the burning haystacks was seen by the British ship, the HMS Preston, as it lay anchored in the harbor. A signal was sent from Preston to British soldiers on Noddle's Island that enemy troops were there, and the first actions of the battle began. Dozens of British troops were living in the Williams mansion, and they began to pursue the colonists. The Preston also alerted another vessel, the schooner Diana, to move down Chelsea Creek and destroy any activity they encountered. Remember that Chelsea Creek was more like a river. There was no Broadway with Chelsea. There was nothing there. It was just, a river, an inlet from Boston Harbor. The Diana was under the command of Captain Thomas Graves, who was warned that the tides could be tricky and to be cautious at the time. The Diana had many Marines and also 16 cannon that were ready for battle. Stark's men were in ditches at this time, water and mud up to their necks. Luckily, they all managed to escape to Hog Island and eventually the Sale Farm. By early afternoon, most of the livestock was removed. However, the Diana was cannonading the colonial troops continually. The principal fighting took place between Stark's troops and the Marines aboard the schooner until around 7 that night. Captain Graves of the Diana forgot about the tides, and during the middle of the afternoon, the ship was stuck in the heavy mud of Chelsea Creek, and the provincial troops now had them in their sights. Stark had asked for reinforcements. At 9 o'clock that night, future General Israel Putnam from Connecticut arrived with approximately 300 fresh troops. He called out to the Diana if it would surrender and promised that he would provide quarters for the Marines. The answer that the schooner gave was a cannon shot, and the fighting resumed that night. Present throughout the entire battle was Dr. Joseph Warren, who, besides sheltering Hancock and Samuel Adams from the British, lost his life at Bunker Hill a month later. Diana continued to drift despite the barges sent to secure her. Around 11 p.m., the British finally abandoned the schooner, leaving everything on board. Major Loami Baldwin, with a group of 12, boarded the Diana. They rowed out in a small rowboat. They boarded the Diana around midnight and stripped the vessel of all valuable material. The ship was then set ablaze, and the burning hulk lit up the entire area. In the entire engagement, not one patriot lost his life, and only 4 were wounded. An eyewitness wrote that a man from Townsend was shot through the cheek, with the bullet entering one side and exiting the other. It was estimated that 20 British were killed and approximately 50 wounded. The provincials under Colonel Stark remained in the area until 2 o'clock the next day and marched back to Medford. On May 30th, work continued on the removal of the livestock from the islands to the mainland. Before I give you the epilogue, a little bit about Loami Baldwin. If the name sounds familiar, the Baldwin apple was named after him in his honor. But one more thing about Loami Baldwin. He is considered to be the father of civil engineering. He was a brilliant man who, during the Revolutionary War, would construct bridges and other fortifications. And he was the one who, with several colonists, rowed out in a small boat to the Diana and set it ablaze. The Battle of Chelsea Creek was important for many reasons, I believe. First, excluding the capture of Fort Ticonderoga on May 10th, 1775, by Ethan Allen, the Battle of Chelsea Creek can be called the second major engagement of the Revolution. Secondly, it was the first armed and offensive military engagement of the Revolution deliberately entered upon by Massachusetts citizens. Thirdly, here was the first capture and destruction of a British vessel during the war. Fourth, for the first time, the colonies united against a common enemy. While Stark came down with New Hampshire regulars, he was joined by Massachusetts troops under John Nixon, and eventually by Connecticut colonists under Israel Putnam. Finally, it was the first battle in American history where cannon was used. In my opinion, the Battle of Chelsea Creek was more than just a raid on cattle, and we citizens of Revere should be proud that between the opening battles of Lexington and Concord and the Battle of Bunker Hill, we witnessed history in our own backyard. Today, just west of the skating rink and on Broadway, stands a marker commemorating the bravery and patriotism of the heroes from the Battle of Chelsea Creek. I was fortunate to be on a committee many years ago that decided that a monument should be erected there. And I actually wrote the words myself that are on that monument. And during the trolley tour that we give every year, it's one of the stops we make. The bus pulls into the skating rink. How many have gone on the trolley tour? Then you know, we pull into the skating rink, we get off, we go right up to the monument, and I talk about the entire battle. One more thing. I'm in a running battle right now with some people from Machias, Maine. They insist that the first naval battle of the American Revolution took place there. Well, first of all, there was a naval battle in which a ship called the Margarita was captured by colonial troops, but it was on June 12th, 1775. But they, to this day, will insist that was the first naval battle. Talk about a nerd. You know, my wife says you're wasting your time, but I can't help it. Any questions on the Battle of Chelsea Creek? Go.
Did they ever find any artifacts?
I knew that question would come.
Yes.
No, they did not find any artifacts. They have looked.
Yeah.
They thought they at one time they thought they found burned remains or wood from the Diana.
Yeah.
No. They did some carbon testing or whatever they do. They couldn't decisively prove that it was part of the ship. No, not at all.
Was the Diana and the Margarita named for royalty in England?
Don't know about the Margarita, but no, the Diana was not.
Okay, thank you.
No. The Diana was probably named for the, I think, wasn't she the Roman goddess of hunting?
Yes, Greek.
Greek,
Yeah,
excuse me.
Romans just stole all the. We did, so I'm,
You got it.
I'm half Italian, I can say that. Israel Putnam. is
Yeah, I want to talk about him
Pantry,
too.
right? Yeah, his house is Putnam Pantry.
Putnam Pantry.
So he must have settled in.
I got another beef. Another beef.
With Putnam Pantry, I mean, the ice cream is so delicious.
Toby again brought my name to a woman who's writing a book on the American Revolution, and especially on Israel Putnam. Whether what he did or everything he did was actual fact or was it rumor. And I have written to her and I said to her, before you write your book, let me tell you the truth about Israel Putnam. First of all, he did not become a general until after the Battle of Chelsea Creek. And why? He glorified himself at the Battle of Chelsea Creek. He was there, but as I mentioned, he didn't arrive until 9 p.m. that night. Okay, the battle was just about over. Stark and Nixon and others, they were the heroes of the Battle of Chelsea Creek, not Israel Putnam. But Putnam had good, as we would say today, public relations. Okay? Good PR. Where Stark, nothing was written about him, okay, in the Battle of Chelsea Creek. So, word got back to the Continental Congress about Putnam, and he was promoted to general by George Washington. He was later at the Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17th, which, as we know, took place on Breed's Hill. Putnam was not the man who supposedly said, "Don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes." It was Prescott, William Prescott, whose statue stands in front of the Bunker Hill Monument today. Putnam claimed it was him. The other thing about Putnam that I learned was that at the Battle of Bunker Hill, he wasn't even at Breed's Hill. He was at Bunker Hill, which was a little further back. And Stark and others wanted reinforcements and wanted more ammunition to come up. And for some reason he didn't, and there were people who referred to him as a coward. Yeah, there was one historian who wrote that Putnam was actually a coward. So I wrote to this woman and I told her, and I hope she puts it in her book. But he's a fascinating man, and indeed, Putnam Pantry is, and a picture of him.
His house.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll go to Richardson's instead.
On the street.
Right.
It's
Right.
Danvers, Middleton, yeah, right.
Yeah, right. Putnam, yeah. Well,
Jeff, if you could, I know that we've talked about that area, Slade's Mill. Could you talk to us a little bit about Slade's Mill?
sure. You've been by it 100 times. Between, right down the highway from the Battle of Chelsea Creek Monument and the skating rink, of course, is the former Slade's Mill, which is today, of course, a rooming house, an apartment. I wrote this myself, and I'll give you the highlights. Since the dawn of history, spices have been mentioned as one of the world's choicest possessions. They formed part of the tribute paid by the Queen of Sheba to King Solomon. The 3 wise men came from the east, bearing gifts of gold, frankincense, myrrh, and spices to the manger of the Christ child in Bethlehem. Christopher Columbus stumbled upon America in an endeavor to find a new trade route to bring spices from India. Spices were used not only to stimulate jaded appetites, but their sweet pungent odor made them useful as medicine and as deodorants in the age that knew little of the antiseptic qualities of soap and water. From the colorful shores of the Mediterranean, the Middle East, to the windswept tide marshes of the New England coast during the colonial days is a long stretch. Yet it was here, in an old Massachusetts mill, that the most interesting step in the general household distribution of spices began. Little has been written of the old mills built along our rocky coast during pioneer days. There are books on colonial furniture, plates, and architecture, but the struggles and achievements of the colonial miller have remained unsung. From the outset, the early colonists began harnessing the little rivers that tumbled into the sea to grind their grain, and in some cases, use the force of the tides to turn their wheels. How much the early settlers depended on these mills is clearly shown by a petition of 200 inhabitants of Medford, Malden, Woburn, and Rumney Marsh, drawn about 1773, protesting that they had been greatly damified by reason of a certain break lying open in Spot Pond Dam in Stoneham. In 1721, the people of Rumney Marsh, the Rumney Marsh section of Wintersimmet, that are part of Boston, now the cities of Revere and Chelsea, petitioned the selectmen for the right to build a tidewater mill in Rumney Marsh. The selectmen of Boston, after viewing the site, granted the petition, provided that, quote, they or the undertakers of the said mill indemnify the town of Boston from any damage done by setting up dams or any other works belonging to the mill or any property or lands either above or below the place assigned for the mill. The first mill was not built until 1734, originally called The Mill, but later to be known as Slade's Mill. A part interest in the mill was sold just prior to 1793 for 600 pounds sterling and 50 Spanish milled dollars. Except for interruptions by fire, a tide mill on this site had been in operation for over 200 years. The oldest tide mill in point of continuous operation in America, if not in the world. In 1816, after what appears to have been a disastrous fire, the town petitioned the General Court for permission to rebuild the dam across the Tidewater Creek on the site of the old mill. The old owners were brought out for 200 pounds sterling, and a new tide mill was erected on the spot, which had been in continuous operation ever since. Originally planned to be a grist mill, the charter, even today, states that the mill must at all times hold itself in readiness to grind corn to any citizen of Chelsea, provided only that the corn be raised in the town of Chelsea. In 1827, a share in the mill property passed into the hands of Henry Slade. Under his management, the mill began to grind snuff as well as corn. Around the mill was a growing settlement now called Chelsea, a forerunner of the modern New England mill town with its tall chimneys, its busy streets, filled with the argot of many alien tongues. The town of Chelsea originally consisted of 4 farms. The first of these to be sold was bought by Henry Slade, the Williams Farm, on the waterfront, where he erected the first church, the first bank, and later the first city hall. How different it was over 100 years ago, when Henry Slade was running his mill. A vivid picture of the life of the times has come down through his sons and grandsons to us. How, on a Sunday morning, the old chaise with the white mare carried the mill owner and his family to the Park Street Church, where David pitched the tunes for the congregation on his flute and his wife led the choir. Of the little hand ferry that used to cross the river before the bridge was built and the horses had to swim across in the wake of the ferry, now quilting parties, husking bees, and sleigh rides were the only entertainment to break into the hard, stern routine of making a living out of the meager facilities at hand. In 1837, 2 of Henry's sons, David and Levi, conceived the idea of grinding spice in the mill. Perhaps the trade in snuff was growing slack, or competition was too keen. Up to this time, spice had been sold to the housewife whole, and each home had to have its own hand grinder. Pepper seeds were ground on the table in casters with a little handle on the top. The boys ground up a half a barrel of cinnamon, slung the barrel between 2 poles, and trudged off across the marshes to Boston with it. The cinnamon was soon sold to local grocers, and a new industry was born, the business of spice grinding. David, though still in his teens, had all the instincts of a captain of industry. One year, his father turned the mill over to him, and young David made a profit of $500 in a 12-month period. In great alarm, the father hastily took the business back again. The youngster was getting rich too fast. Nevertheless, the experiment in spice grinding was too successful to be sidetracked. David took his brother in with him under the name of the D&L Slade Company. While many changes have occurred, the spice mill still stands on the same spot on the edge of the marshes. Beneath its time-stained beams were huge crates and bundles of spices from the far corners of the world. Cinnamon from Java and Ceylon, today Sri Lanka. Paprika from Spain, pepper and nutmeg from the East Indies, cloves from Zanzibar, ginger from Jamaica and the Orient. From the steaming heat of the tropics, these cargoes have come to be ground and prepared for your table in prosaic New England. Inside of the Slade's mill, the air was golden brown with fine dust from countless grindings of pure spices. Over it all hung the sweet, clean, pungent odor of cinnamon, of thyme and nutmeg, redolent of the atmosphere of lands of color and romance. While more than half of the mill was in later years equipped with modern electrically driven machines, by the way, that was about 1932, it is in the tide-driven machinery that interest naturally centers, because here, in all probability, were the oldest tidewater machines on a large scale in all of America, if not the world. Electricity, as a motive power, increase the efficiency at the expense of the romance because the power from tides alone is intermittent, averaging only about 6 to 7 hours out of every 12. The machinery for harnessing the tide, though simple, is very ingenious. Here we go. The old dam spans a tidewater creek and makes an artificial pond for storage of water. In the dam is a sluiceway, you have it on your handout, with gates hinged with great round wooden dowels. As the tide comes in, the pressure of the water opens the gates. Then when the tide turns and the current catches the gates on the other side, they are forced shut and they hold the flood tide in the pond. With this head of water, averaging from 8 to 10 feet depending on the course of the tide, 3 of the grinding machines in Slade's mill began operating. When the tide begins to ebb and the water recedes below the dam, gates are opened in the mill and water from the pond starts to flow into round cylinders about 6 feet in diameter set upright. In each cylinder or barrel is a shaft with pitched blades on the lower end, very much like the blades of a propeller. The current of water falling on the blades starts the shaft rotating. On the upper end of each shaft is a great gear wheel with wooden cogs connecting with the shafting that turns the grinding mills. Standing beside this machinery, much of it built before the days of steel, your mind goes back instinctively to generations of stout millers whose brawny arms have turned cumbersome wheels that start the water flowing through the sluice. One recalls cold winter nights when they stood drenched in icy water, waiting for the tide to turn, with their feet frozen in their shoes. You see the strips of dried beef hanging from the rafters from which they snatched a brief meal at intervals during the long watches of the night. Or again, one pictures the coming of spring, with the sluiceway crammed with alewives, fighting their way against the current to their spawning beds in the marshes above the dam. A story of iron men and wooden machinery doing an honest day's work that we, over 200 years later, might live in greater comfort and ease. Side by side with the old tide-driven machines in later years stood modern electrically driven machines with their polished steel grinding wheels whirring at high speed. On the top floors, the great bundles of fragrant spices were broken open and fed into chutes to the grinders. First of all, the spice passed through magnetized steel plates to take out all foreign matter, and a motley collection, these magnet gathered bits of steel, nails, wire, and so forth. While New England habits of cleanliness did not pervade the Orient to any great extent. After passing the magnets and sieve, the spice went through 2 sets of grinding rolls, which pulverized it into a fine powder. Then this powder was picked up in endless chains of buckets and carried back to the top floor for resifting and then loading into barrels, preparatory to being sent to the packing plants in Boston. In the great plant in Boston, the work of packing Slade spices for the market was taken up by several batteries of machines. All the work the 2 Slade boys did so laboriously years ago by hand was later done on machines in a fraction of the time without a hand touching package or contents from start to finish. What a saving in cost this meant to the consumer. We know the old record books of the D&L Slade Company, kept by Mr. David Slade in his old-fashioned, neat handwriting nearly 100 years ago, tells the story. The present-day housewife would be appalled at the cost of her month's supply of pepper, for instance, as compared with what she pays now. Because of the economies affected in packing, spices are now a common household necessity. No longer are they counted as the choicest possessions of the wealthy alone. No longer are spices used as medicines and deodorants, and yet it is interesting to know that men and women who live long lives in a spice-laden atmosphere have very little sickness. Henry Slade lived to a ripe old age, and David was 92 when he died. So perhaps, after all, there is something in the ancient theory that spices have a beneficial effect on the health as well as the appetite of the human race. The old expression, spice of life.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ron. On June 30th, 1972, Slade Spice Mill was honored by being placed on the National Register of Historic Places. The National Register is the official list of the nation's cultural resources worthy of preservation and includes districts, sites, buildings, structures, and objects significant in American history, architecture, archaeology, and culture. By the way, our own cemetery is on that register. The National Register was established under the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 and is administered in Massachusetts by the Massachusetts Historical Commission. On July 1st, 1972, the D&L Slade Company was sold to Brady Enterprises, Incorporated, no relation to Tom, of Weymouth, Massachusetts, who operated the mill until July 1st, 1976, just 3 days prior to our 200th anniversary of the birth of our country, when the old mill was conveyed back to Revere ownership to Slade's Mill, Incorporated. Just to finish up, in 2004, a local architect, Robert Brooker, refurbished the mill and over a dozen apartments were created. In 2014, the property was bought by real estate agent Christopher Sackhoy, S-A-C-H-O-Y. However, because his company was in Cambridge, he soon divested the mill to a husband and wife real estate team, Sunya, S-U-N-Y-U, Properties of Andover, Massachusetts, for $2.12 million. There are 18 studios and 1-bedroom apartment. A museum on the ground floor today contains machines, pictures, signs from the time that the mill imported spices from around the world. And when we go on a trolley tour, it's one of the stops we make, I have the key, not only of the Rodney Marsh burial ground, but this pocket, but the key to the museum at Slade's Mill in my pocket as well. And we go in and we look around, and still there's machinery and old pictures. That's there. Yep. Slade's Mill. It's now apartments. I would guess probably flight attendants and people like that probably live there. Yes.
Is there any, there's nothing outside that says there's a museum.
No, there isn't.
I'm trying to not think, you go by there kind of fast, but I haven't seen anything that notes that even was Slade's Mill on the outside.
Nothing. That's something we can work on.
Should have put it on the bill.
No, but that's something we can work on. Getting a plaque. We'll have to talk to the people who own the property, of course. But that's a wonderful idea. And I'll be glad to write the words for that plaque. Good.
Well, remember, this way back, it had that book on the side.
Yeah, on the side, yes,
Yeah,
right.
it was very
Yeah, I remember as a kid going by there and smelling the cinnamon,
Yeah.
smelling it.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Yeah. I see another hand. Yeah.
Is it true that inside the building, sometimes people can smell spices through the walls?
I'm not sure about that. I've been there many
Yeah.
times and I haven't smelled
That
it.
might have been a
Of
rumor.
course, my
Yeah.
sense of smell has gone as I've gotten older. Maybe, but that would be nice, yeah. Yeah, don't know. One more thing. Several years ago, I wrote a poem about Slade's Mill. And I gave you all a copy. Just like to read it to you. You all have a copy? Yeah. In the 18th century, there could not be found a place in all Romney Marsh with corn finding the ground. One day, a young man took notice of that. A neighbor, a Chelsea neighbor of ours named Thomas Pratt. On the creek he built, with individual will, an edifice that would be Chelsea's first mill. It profited for years, exchanging money for trade. In 1837, the mill was sold to Henry Slade. Henry worked at the vocation both night and day, quietly improving the mill in his usual way, laboring for years and enduring the noise. He passed the mill on to his two industrious boys. David and Levi never thought twice, and the mill changed to the grinding of spice. Every spice on earth, Slade's Mill would make you, arriving every week from Ceylon and Jamaica. I'm sorry. As the tide rushed in twice each day, the wonders of the mill would be on display. Grinding, then sifting, resifting, and then to ship To Boston, the boys would often make the trip. Like salt, the spices made palatable the lives of children and the men of New England wives. On June the 30th, in the year 1972, Slade's Mill received an honor that was long overdue. The architectural gem with all its graces was placed on the Register of Historic Places. Now when I see Slade's Mill and think of its evolution, I know how important it was to our industrial revolution. One more building that we citizens should hold dear to make us proud of our home in Revere. Beach is next, but before we get to that, Joe.
Anybody know what happened to that quote that was on the side?
I have researched that, and I have no idea, unless it weathered and eventually disappeared. Yeah, but had quite a few words on that side. Anything else? Okay. Bob.
So Jeff, I think this is a great time for us to speak a little bit about what commonly referred to as the history of Revere, is to speak about Revere Beach. People don't realize all that we've just heard about today, Jeffrey Pearlman speaking about the rich history of Revere itself. People think the history of Revere begins and ends at Revere Beach, and we certainly learned today that it did not. I've been doing a 1 hour slideshow history of Revere Beach that Peter McCauley, my mentor, did before myself.
Yep.
I've been doing that for about 20 years. That's how I got interested in the rich history of Revere itself. But I will tell you that, when Jeff speaks about the history of Revere Beach, it's going to be far different than my enthusiasm about the Revere Beach that we all can remember. The Cyclone, the Hippodrome, the Wild Mouse, the dance halls, the music, the pizza, the fast food, the girls, the cars, the bridging. In that order, in all honesty, my mother and father met at Revere Beach. Many of your own probably did as well. But Revere Beach has an even greater history than just the rides that we can recall. So I would like to ask Jeff to expand upon that. I'm a Revere Beach enthusiast. People will call me an historian, probably because I have gray hair. I'm really a Revere Beach enthusiast. So Jeff, please tell us about Revere Beach and its rich history, if you will.
Just a personal story. My parents met on Revere Beach, and I met my wife at Punk's Corner on Revere Beach. Now, my wife was from Winthrop. 1962, 63, 64. I know where she was, but I knew her cousins who lived in Everett, Malden, come down the beach. All of a sudden, this girl arrives with her cousin. It's my wife. So I looked at her and I said, what's your name? Introduced myself, and the rest is history. Here we are, 51 years later. Okay, but I met her, like my parents did, on Revere Beach. Good story. I begin with a quote. Charles Eliot, a Harvard-educated planner, city planner, and architect, wrote, "We must not conceal from visitors the long sweep of the open beach, which is the finest thing about this reservation." Charles Eliot was called upon by the state to get rid of the old dilapidated buildings and storefronts along the waterfront and to clear it and make Revere Beach, or Crescent Beach as it was known then, what it is today. What made Revere Beach so popular from the late 1800s, 1875 to 1940, was the narrow gauge railroad. Narrow gauge railroad ran about 8 1/8 miles from East Boston to Lynn, Boston, Revere Beach, and Lynn Railroad. It was that railroad that many of our grandparents and great-grandparents took to get to Revere Beach in the early years. The section of Beachmont grew because of the narrow gauge railroad. Many of you don't know this, but at one time there were white pitched tents, huge tents in Beachmont, before houses were built there. And many wives and children would summer at Beachmont, and their husbands who worked in Boston would take the narrow gauge to Beachmont and would live there and then go back to work on a Monday morning. Beach bar became quite popular. The large white tents were there first. It's the oldest public beach in America, and hopefully we'll keep it that way. In 1905, the Wonderland Amusement Park was built. The Wonderland Amusement Park, located where Wonderland is located today, was the first Disneyland. In fact, many people say that Walt Disney got his idea for Disneyland at the Wonderland Amusement Park. Before Revere Beach was developed, the Wonderland Amusement Park, some 25 acres, contained incredible amusements and rides and attractions. Among them was shooting the chutes. It was the highest chute in the world. You would be up on an incline, and in a boat, you would go down the chute into a body of water, skimming across that water. It gave a thrill to those who would do that. They actually had their own private fire department at Wonderland Amusement Park. And there was an attraction called Fighting the Flames, in which a city, which was constructed, was burned purposely down, and people would sit in stands and watch the fire department come and put the fire out. There was an honest-to-goodness Wild West show. Buffalo Bill Cody would attract even Native American Indians to come, and a rodeo and a Wild West show was put on at Wonderland. And this was before people traveled to the West and only knew from books what it was like in the Wild West in the late 19th century. My favorite attraction was the infant incubators. Yes, infant incubators where real babies were housed in a hospital. And they were on wide little cots, and people would go in and view them like you would view animals in a zoo. Premature babies were an attraction at Wonderland Amusement Park. Yeah, Japanese village. People again knew nothing about the Far East, and the whole village on a Japanese motif was built with colored lights and Japanese arch, music and food as well. And a parade of characters, including, of course, Alice in Wonderland. And again, they have this march every day in Disneyland. And I keep wondering if Walt Disney got his ideas for the march from Wonderland Amusement. By the way, it cost so much that unfortunately Wonderland Amusement Park opened in 1905 and was shut down in 1911. Wow. But that didn't stop entrepreneurs and others from taking those ideas and going to Revere Beach. The dance halls. One of the first things that I love to talk about when I talk about Revere Beach are the many dance halls. Spanish Gables. Spanish Gables, located at Elliott's Circle, where the Atlantic Towers is. There it is right there. Thank you, Toby. Later became the Ocean View Ballroom. In 1959, it burned to the ground, and tragically a fireman was lost fighting the blaze. Many great bands, especially in the 30s and 40s, played in the Ocean View as well as other ballrooms on the beach. Crescent Gardens, which later became the Beach View Ballroom, was located on the corner of Shirley Avenue and Beach Street. And in 1960, that burned down. My father took me down. We stood across the street at Revere Beach Station, and you could feel the flames from that building. I was 12 years old, and I remember that like it was yesterday. The Beachview Ballroom also had a movie theater on the Ocean Ave side, and people told me that during the Depression, when you went in and saw a movie, they would give you a plate, a dish, as well.
I saw Bambi there.
You saw Bambi there. There you go. They also they had vaudeville acts as well at the Beachview.
So Jeff, can I just add about those?
Absolutely.
Those painted dishes, if you went to see the matinee on a Sunday, you get that painted plate or that painted dish. And, you'd be watching the play or the movie, whatever you're watching, and you know, the ladies would put the painted dish on their lap. And while people were watching the movie, the presentation, all of a sudden the plates would fall off their lap, and crash, because the ladies were falling asleep. They were tense, they would fall asleep. It's just one of the things that would happen. But it was you often hear that because the ladies work long, hard hours while their husbands work too. But they just got distracted. Also, I'd like to also point out that the Crescent Garden Ball movie theater had one of the
There you go, right.
It is right up here.
Right.
But I've been told in the center of that, where they had one of the first escalators in Massachusetts.
Yeah, you know what that escalator led to? A roof garden up on top. A roof garden. Where on hot nights, must have had a pleasure to sit there. Speaking of escaping the heat, there was also a ballroom and a dining room at the end of what used to be Holt's Pier. Okay, and Ocean Pier, yeah. And men in their finest attire, women in their evening gowns would sashay on that pier and have a nice dinner and also spend the night dancing out there. I mentioned I would mention Paul Whitman and the Dorsey brothers and others who would perform many of these. Well, we'll get to that in a second. Not in the ballroom.
No problem.
Yeah, get to that next. Okay.
Mary Ann had a question for you.
My grandfather was the band at the Gables in the Ocean Bay.
Really? Oh my goodness. Wow. I love hearing stories like that. Wow. Further down the beach was the Frolic Nightclub, where my parents went and would not talk about me. I was with a babysitter, I guess, but Barbara Streisand, Toby Field, Jerry Vale, Diane Carroll, they all performed there. I think I saw a ticket once for Barbara Streisand. I think it was like $2.50 to get in to see her. Okay? Yeah. But the Frolic Nightclub, world famous, world famous. Pines Hotel, that Carol brought up. Theodore Roosevelt spoke there in 1912. President Taft also spoke there when he was running. Again, if you remember your history, in 1912, Roosevelt split the Republican Party in two, and he actually ran as a progressive from the so-called Bull Moose Party. William Howard Taft was the Republican, and Woodrow Wilson was the Democrat. And because the Republican Party was split in two, Wilson won. But Taft, during that campaign, also spoke at the Pines Hotel. Also, private yachts were there, and it was quite a place to take up residence. By the way, the Ocean Pier Ballroom existed from 1910 until it burned down in 1939. The MDC Bathhouse, which is still there today. You might know that there's a clock in front of that bathhouse, and I know you know this story. What is interesting is that there is a face with hands on both sides of that clock. Why? Because men and women years ago would change or rent a bathing suit and a towel in the bathhouse. And they would be charged maybe a dime, and they would walk underground, not across the underground, onto the beach. And they would have to keep looking at the clock to make sure they would get their towel and bathing suit back before the time expired, so they wouldn't have to pay a fine. Okay? And I guess the towels and bathing suits were washed, so the next person, okay? So they were woolen.
Wet woolen bathing suits.
Yeah, and we've got examples of women's and men's bathing suits upstairs in our museum as well. Okay, so that's the changing of people.
Oh, one other thing, if I could.
Sure, interrupt.
You may notice on top of the State Police building on Revere Beach, you'll see the codfish weather vane. That is the same codfish weather vane that had been on top of the old bathhouse. It had been put away and stored for many, many years.
Didn't know that.
But one of the things about that codfish weather vane, if you get really up close, you'll notice there's some repairs that have been made. As it turns out, the MDC police who used to police the beach, at the end of their shifts, the MDC police officers used to take pot shots at codfish weather vane.
Really?
But not to worry, over 50 years, only 2 bullet holes in it.
That's how good a shot they were.
You didn't know that, did you, Toby?
A little bit of trivia, by the way. Speaking of what's at the top of various buildings, at the top of Faneuil Hall is a grasshopper. And did anybody know what's at the top of the Massachusetts State House? No, codfish is in one of the, I think it's the Senate chamber. No, codfish because it's such an important. No, but you're close. It's there because of another very important industry in Massachusetts.
Lobster.
What?
Lobster?
No,
No.
Fish.
not a fish.
Shoes.
An
A bean park?
Acorn. Because of the lumber industry, an acorn. Yep. You learn it. You just don't learn about Revere history in that. All right.
Lumber in Massachusetts.
Amusements. There are some names of giants who began out of their own pocket to build amusements on Revere Beach that many of us still remember. There was Herbert Ridgway, John Hurley, John Shieb, and Louis Bott. Bott, B-O-P-P, Louis Bott. Hurley's, Fred and John started the Derby Racer, the Whip, the Carousel. They were hand-carved horses. Many of them had human faces on them. Just incredible, hand-carved, many from Austria and Germany. Bluebeard's Palace with wind-blown skirts, rickety bridges, okay? Bluebeard's Palace, also, as Bob mentioned, the Virginia Reel, the Tilt-A-Whirl, the Bubble Bounce. And the Bubble Bounce, of course, had those tub seats that would go up and down. Roller coaster, lightning. By the way, there were 3 roller coasters on Revere Beach, each named after a meteorological disaster. The lightning, the thunderbolt, and the cyclone. Yeah. By the way, I think it was the lightning did not last very long, maybe a year or 2, because a sailor, I heard, was retrieving a hat that blew off and he fell to his death.
Oh, wow.
All steel, by the way, at that time. Remember, the cyclone was made of wood. The cyclone, by the way, opened in 1925 and ended in 1974. And the Wild Mouse. Okay? Every July 4th, when Schaefer's would put on the fireworks at Revere Beach, they had a barge out there. My father would take my sister and me to Revere Beach. The rides were going on before the fireworks. For some reason, I didn't want to go on the Wild Mouse, but my father took my sister on, not knowing what the Wild Mouse was. They both got off, and I think my father was more shaken up than my sister was. It was pretty scary. And I remember the Virginia Reel. You almost felt like you were going on to Ocean Avenue.
Jeff, if I could just
And
add,
the cyclone, sure, about this. And the cyclone, if you remember, click, 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 click. And you got to the top, and you had this beautiful panorama of the beach before you went down. And one more thing, the double Ferris wheel. The double Ferris wheel. If you were stuck, as I was a couple of times, at the very top, especially at night, what a view, on a summer night, what a view you would get.
just a little bit of an editorial comment. You know, you did mention that the Cyclone roller coaster was taken off Revere Beach in 1974, but it actually stopped operating in 1969. That was the time of its first fire. So it stopped operating in 69, and it had multiple fires of what the remaining structure had been there, but it actually was removed in 1974. And one of the saddest scenes we can talk about also is, you know, you'll see Norman Guttrell's Blizzard of '78 scene. To me, that signifies an emblematic and iconic scene of the end of Revere Beach as we much knew it. But the cyclone, when the cyclone stopped operating in 1969, that was a sign of things to come. That was going to be the end.
Yeah, the Blizzard, I was going to mention, there's such a number on the pavilions, as well as the rides and amusements, most of you, like me, were so lucky to grow up in the 50s and 60s and remember rides like the Himalaya and transistor radios, and listening to Freddie Cannon, Palisades Park. Just great memories, I tell you, it was a joy. Revere Beach. My friends and I from the projects, we would go down around Easter time, before the beach, just as soon as the warm weather came, we'd get out to the beach and just walk around. Yeah. And finally, eating establishments. Can I miss this? Beginning with the Paul Roger House, which was originally owned by Episcopalians. Coast Guard, it was a Coast Guard station in World War I. The Driftwood, out the seaside, former Mayor Carey turned it in to a restaurant and an inn. The General Edwards Inn, one of my favorite restaurants, located at Cary Circle, was an institution. And many of us went there and enjoyed a great seafood dinner, steak dinner, at the General Edwards Inn.
And they have wedding receptions.
And they had wedding receptions.
Okay,
Yep.
and he touched upon the Paul Roger House.
Yes,
And the ownership by the Episcopalian
yes,
Church. I
yes.
just want to expand a little bit upon that. It was
Yes.
known as Mother's Rest
Mother's Rest.
at that time. Because it was a place for single women with infant children to get rest and to care and get some training in the care of their infant children. Before
Then
it
it became the Paul Roger.
Right.
then, yeah, Ray Carey bought it,
Yeah.
became the Paul Roger, named after those two.
Imagine, incubators.
And then one Sunday afternoon,
Mothers.
then one Sunday afternoon, they had some extra, they had some roast beef left over after
Right.
one of their functions. I think that's how it went. And they made roast beef sandwiches and they put it on the outside, on the side of that building. And they took off. They sold just like that. And that was the beginning of Kelly's Roast Beef in 1951.
Bob mentioned
He was a
that.
chef there.
Bob mentioned Kelly's. I'm on vacation, and every once in a while I'll meet someone from East Boston, Chelsea, Revere, and in fact I met an Alaska cruise. I met a guy. He said I was born on Park Avenue. I said, really? He said, yeah. Is Kelly still there? Oh, I mentioned I'm from Revere. All they want to know about is Revere Beach. I live in Salem. Okay, and again, I'm not a Salem historian, but I love the history of Salem. And I hate it when people say, oh, Salem, that's the witches. They have no idea about the maritime history. Salem was the first seaport that sent ships to China, okay? Elijah Derby was a wealthy shipper. And the only reason why Salem declined was because the state refused to excavate and make bigger the harbor. So Boston became the center instead of Salem. But yeah, oh, I know Revere Beach. Well, now I hope you know the story of Revere Beach. Joe and Nemo's, world famous, one all around, please. I know what that meant. The best pepper burger and foot-long hot dogs with the Danny's. Oh my gosh. And Danny's, of course, it's not in that picture, but it would be on the corner. There you go, Toby. Yep. Now, here's an interesting story. How many remember the umbrella and chair stand on Revere Beach, where you could rent an umbrella or a chair? That was owned by the Yanofsky family. Dave Yanofsky was a friend of mine. And in 1964, some friends and I would walk down from Broadway to the beach, and we would go behind where Danny's was, where they stored the chairs and the umbrellas, and we would help Dave set up his stand across the street. And that was about 8 o'clock, 8:30. By 9:30, 10 o'clock, the kids would all be down by Punk's Corner, and we would just mosey down and spend all day playing whist on the beach. Yeah. Okay. Just a memory of mine about Danny's. Peppered steak. What comes to mind? Rudolph's. Where they gave you a peppered steak on a hamburger roll on a paper plate, and I swear there was more peppered steak on the plate than there was in the roll. Just overflowed.
But when you walk down the corner away from that, after they stuck the fork into it, your arm was filled with grease.
Excellent. Also pizza. So many pizza places, but I'll just name 3. Bill Ash's, Yankees, and Aaron's, of course, owned by the Gold Farm. Yep. And of course, Kelly's roast beef. And finally, in the 1960s and 70s, the beach was not properly maintained. As Bobby mentioned, cyclone stopped running in 1969. The blizzard of 78 put an end to that. Fires destroyed the dance hall, the ocean view, and the beach view, and the ocean pier. Early 1980s, condominiums began to be built at St. George, Water's Edge, of course the Jack Sauter House. And again, I will leave you once again with that great quote by Charles Eliot. We must not conceal from visitors the long sweep of the open beach, which is the finest thing about this reservation. Ladies and gentlemen, from my heart, and I mean this, I want to thank you for giving up your time and coming here and listening to this guy talk about something that's very close to his heart. Thank you very much.